animal welfare. All I can say is that every time a big truck drives by with pigs inside of it, I do cry, and they look very sad.
Can you tell me what the Farm Bill is?
Nope. Farm Bill? Yeah, nope.
Animal welfare? Well, I assume that's when an animal family is below the poverty line and receives additional support from the government. So the Farm Bill is the man who has worked on the farm for 80 years.
Tell me, what do you know about Proposition 12 in California?
Oh, nothing. I know nothing about that. I'm so sorry. Animal welfare, like how they take care of the animals. You know, agricultural and food things.
I don't know what the Farm Bill is.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the CAP podcast, Contemporary Issues in Agriculture podcast. We are so glad to have you all with us today.
Hey, everybody. I'm glad you came back to listen again. So we're just going to do a quick recap of what the podcast is going to be moving forward. So once a month, at the beginning of the month, we're going to put out a podcast with the students talking to different people within different industries, going over the different types of agricultural issues that we see, just like we told you last week. And then in the middle of the month, Sydney and I are going to talk to you guys both kind of what we thought about the episode and also addressing any comments or questions that you guys send us.
Yeah, and the students are hosting the episodes. So if you hear them say host, they're the ones who are hosting the episodes from the class, just to eliminate any confusion with that. But we'll get right into it. Today, we are discussing raw milk legalization. For those of you who didn't know, raw milk was legalized in Iowa in 2023, so really not that long ago. And there was a lot of social media takes on raw milk, just the benefits, who might be affected by it. And we're really excited to sort out some of these ideas and explore the topic today with Reagan and Haley. So we'll turn it over to them and they can tell us all about raw milk.
Hello and welcome to our podcast, where we discuss important topics in the agriculture industry that affect farmers, ranchers, and consumers all across Iowa. My name is Reagan Dolan. I'm a senior in agricultural communications and animal science. I am from Northeast Iowa, and I have a passion for the beef industry.
And my name is Haley Rossmiller. I'm a junior at Iowa State University studying agricultural communications with a minor in animal science, originally from Eastern Iowa, and I have a passion for all things animal health related.
As students enrolled in an experimental agricultural communications class at Iowa State, we were tasked with developing a podcast focusing on a controversial agricultural issue.
Reagan, before we jump into our podcast episode today that I'm really excited about recording, I have a very important question for you. So, what is your favorite dairy product?
Oh, this is such a big question because I love all things dairy, but I think I'm going to have to go the dessert route and say ice cream. It's such a versatile thing. I can put anything on it, and I love ice cream. I eat it way too much.
Ice cream is such a great sweet treat. I feel like so many college students can relate to doing great on a test or doing bad on a test and you go get ice cream, or you finish that homework assignment, you go get ice cream, because it's always a celebration when you're in college. But I would have to say my favorite dairy product would be cheese, because it's on everything that I at least make. All my sandwiches have cheese on it. I eat cheese sticks way too much. I like sharp cheddar cheese sticks from Sam's Club. I go buy them in the big pack and I eat at least one every day. So cheese has to be my favorite. Well, that was a great conversation to have about our favorite dairy products, because it's really correlated and related to our podcast today, where we're talking about everything dairy related and the recent legalization of raw milk here in Iowa. But first, I want to thank all of our listeners for joining us today. We are recording here at the Student Innovation Center on campus at Iowa State University, and the Student Innovation Center has an awesome educational space called the Digital Media Studio. And I just want to give a big shout out to our friends here at the studio who helped us record this podcast. They have been super helpful.
Yes, for sure. We could not have created this without them. So just to get started, in today's episode, we will discuss the recent legalization of raw milk in the state of Iowa. This new bill went into effect in July of 2023 and has recently raised lots of controversy among the food and dairy science community.
To help provide some insight on this topic, Reagan and I have invited multiple professionals and scientists to come discuss their points of view with us on our podcast.
The guests we will have on today's podcast episode include Dr. Stephanie Clark, Dr. Gail Carpenter, Dr. Frances Tickey, and Esther Arkfeld. Now, let's get started. We hope you enjoy.
We are currently sitting down with Dr. Stephanie Clark, a professor in food science and human nutrition here at Iowa State University. Dr. Stephanie Clark, can you please do a quick intro and tell us a little bit about your role?
Sure. I have been at Iowa State University for 14 years, and I'm a dairy food scientist. So I do research and teaching, running the gamut from the cow all the way to the consumer.
Very cool. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Stephanie. Could you just speak to us briefly about your opinion on the recent legalization of raw milk in Iowa?
Sure. Well, I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed that in the 14 years that I've been here, we've been able to provide a scientific perspective to say why it's risky for the most vulnerable in our population. And in this 14th year that I've been here, unfortunately, the decision was ultimately made to legalize the sale of raw milk.
So we kind of heard a little bit about your opinion on the legalization of raw milk there, but can you share any benefits that possibly come with consuming raw milk?
Well, there's a perceived benefit by the proponents of raw milk, but what I want to clarify is that there is no benefit beyond that of drinking pasteurized milk by consuming raw milk. Frankly, all the nutrients are preserved during the pasteurization process. Pasteurization is simply designed to kill the microorganisms that can cause disease. So there really is no benefit beyond that of pasteurized milk to consuming raw milk. And I can share some of the benefits of drinking milk. It is an good to excellent source of 13 essential nutrients that we need in our diet. And that's whether it's raw or pasteurized, because the nutrients in pasteurized milk are not destroyed. So vitamin C would be an example of a nutrient that's destroyed by heat, or it's degraded, not completely destroyed, but degraded by heat. But milk is not a good to excellent source of vitamin C. It's a good to excellent source of other nutrients, which are actually not harmed by heat. And just to add on to that, there's a perception by those who propose raw milk that lactic acid bacteria or probiotic bacteria are in raw milk, and probiotic bacteria benefit humans. While the fact is probiotic bacteria can benefit humans, you need approximately 1 million per milliliter of milk to benefit from them, which is kind of unfortunate that we need so many to benefit. And so that's why when we eat yogurt or kefir and other fermented foods, those are loaded with probiotic bacteria, loaded like millions and millions per gram or milliliter of food. But raw milk doesn't have that many. It has maybe 100 or 1,000. So we're not actually benefiting from those microorganisms. And the enzymes and other proteins are intact. Those are still intact. The ones that actually degrade milk are destroyed by pasteurization, but beneficial ones, there has not been any scientific literature to say that milk is loaded with specific enzymes that benefit us beyond the fact that they're nutritional. The macronutrient component of protein are definitely beneficial. We need them, but those macronutrients are not destroyed by heat.
Off of that topic, can you share a little bit about some of the drawbacks of consuming raw milk?
Well, the biggest drawback is the potential risk from pathogenic microorganisms. So pathogenic microorganisms are those that cause illness. And while there's no guarantee that milk will have dangerous bacteria, there's no guarantee that milk won't have those dangerous bacteria. And I'm talking specifically about raw milk. Pasteurized milk won't have them because we kill them through the pasteurization process. But raw milk might have those dangerous microorganisms. That alone is the reason why many of us in the industry do not promote the sale of raw milk. Certainly, if you are a farmer and you want to drink your raw milk, certainly feel free. But when you open that up to the public, it is exposing potential risk, and it is our job to at least provide some means to protect the public.
I know you spoke on it a little bit already, but as a professor and food scientist, why is it so important to pasteurize milk?
in short, the reason it's important to pasteurize milk is to protect the safety of those that are immunocompromised, young and old in particular.
Who has been the main customer base pushing for the legalization of raw milk, and why?
My understanding is it's a variety. It's a variety of folks. Sometimes it's farmers, very small farmers. Sometimes it's, believe it or not, chiropractors. I've known some chiropractors in the area that have promoted raw milk. It's been a variety.
I really valued Dr. Clark's insights today on her opinion on the recent legalization of raw milk, but now we're transitioning into our next guest, Dr. Gail Carpenter, who's going to be providing us with some insight and some additional information on this topic.
So we are currently sitting down with Dr. Gail Carpenter, an assistant professor and state extension dairy specialist here at Iowa State University. Dr. Gail Carpenter, can you please briefly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role?
I am our only statewide dairy extension specialist with Iowa State, so 60% of my role is serving Iowa's dairy producers of all shapes and sizes and do a lot of extension and outreach with our dairy team. And then the rest of my role is I do some research here on campus and some commercial farm research as well. And I also have a small teaching appointment. So part of what I do is advise the Dairy Science Club, and part of what I do is coach the Dairy Challenge team. And then I also teach applied dairy farm evaluation.
Awesome. So thank you so much for being here today with us, Gail. Could you speak to us briefly about your opinion on the recent legalization of raw milk here in the state of Iowa?
So there's two different questions that you're asking. One is my opinion on raw milk, and one is my opinion on the legalization. And one of the things that we've struggled with a lot over the past couple months since raw milk was legalized is that the legislation has a lot of wiggle room and a lot of gaps in it when it comes to food safety, but also, in my opinion, it also is bad news for the farmers who want to produce raw milk, because there's a lot of questions that we get about what is or is not allowed and what is or is not allowed versus what is or is not best practice. So there was a lot open in the bill or in the legislation once it was legalized, that didn't give farmers a lot of guidance. So pasteurized producers in the state of Iowa, they have very strict guidelines they have to follow for food safety, even before pasteurization. So if we're looking at the product they produce on farm, they have a lot of standards regarding sanitation and regarding their facilities to make sure that they're producing a clean and safe product, even before it gets taken in for pasteurization and further processing. Our raw milk producers do not have that same stringency when it comes to what's required of them. And so, in my opinion, that leaves them open as producers to a lot of potential problems. And it also has a lot of red flags regarding consumer safety as well. So a lot of my issue with the legalization, the bill as written, is that it doesn't include a lot of consumer safety protections. So farmers have to test milk once a month for bacteria, for things like standard plate count. There's not a lot of actual guidance about what that testing needs to look like. So should it be taken from the bucket? Shouldn't be taken directly from the cow? Should it be where in the stage of milk harvest should that sample be collected? That's not listed. What test needs to be done? That's not listed. Farmers can actually test milk at home on farm, and we are assuming that they're following everything correctly. And we are assuming that I know that the farmers that are testing on farm, a lot of them are doing their best and trying to follow the protocol as best they can. But the fact is that they're not trained lab technicians. So we are encouraging producers to send their monthly samples into the diagnostic lab here at our Iowa State Vet College, because we know that they're going to have, and we have a reduced price for them because they have to do it more frequently than other farms would have to. So that's what we're encouraging our producers to do. But a lot of them will see the price tag on it and say, yeah, I think I could just do it myself at home cheaper. And the fact is that they could do it themselves at home cheaper, but it probably doesn't have the same level of stringency as it would if they were sending it into a commercial lab or to our vet school lab. So that leaves their consumers open to having potential contamination. It also leaves them as producers open to having issues. If they have somebody get sick, it leaves them open to liability. The other thing in the bill that gives me a lot of pause is that farms are supposed to be, and I'm doing air quotes, you guys can't see on the podcast that I do air quotes, but they're supposed to be tested for common diseases once a year. And you're supposed to have a veterinarian come out and look at your cows once a year Again, most farmers are going to have their vets come out more often than that. So that I'm not as concerned about, but they want the vet to come out. The vet is legally required to come out at least once a year, but what the vet is testing for is completely up to that veterinarian. So we assume that they're doing the right thing and we hope they're doing the right thing. And again, the veterinarian standard is one that I'm less concerned about versus the monthly testing. After the milk leaves the cow, there's a lot of potential contamination spots along the way that may or may not be tested in the way raw milk has been legalized in Iowa. So keeps me up at night worrying about what potentially could happen. The other thing with this bill is that these producers are not inspected by IDALS, our Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship. They're not inspected by IDALS like a grade A pasteurized producer would be. And in fact, if they're testing once a month, they don't send those records into anybody. So the only reason they would need those records as the bill's written right now is if somebody came back to if there was an issue and somebody from Health and Human Services was investigating that issue. Practically no oversight when it comes to raw milk production in Iowa because it's outside of IDAL's ability to be able to inspect, and Iowa Health and Human Services has no oversight as long as there hasn't been an outbreak. So when Health and Human Services becomes involved, it's after there's been an outbreak already. We're trusting that everybody's doing everything correctly, but we're just kind of hoping on trust, right? We don't have a second set of eyes that's legally required to be going on farm. And I know I've talked to some raw milk producers, and I believe that a lot of them come with best interests, and a lot of them are really excited to learn how to do things better. And so when I speak with raw milk producers, I really encourage them to continue learning, call us with questions, let us know how we can help you. But it's kind of a scary place to be, basically building the plane mid-flight when we're talking about diseases that can potentially have a very, very adverse consequences. That's the gist of my opinion on the legislation, is that it leaves raw milk producers and consumers open up to not having a lot of protection when it comes to making sure that they're doing things right. The other issue I have with the bill is that producers are limited to 10 or fewer milking animals. So that can be 10 or fewer cows, goats, or sheep, or combinations. So you could have 5 goats and 3 sheep and 2 cows if you wanted. I had a producer call me and double check on that. And I said, yes, that's correct, 10 animals. And he said, well, you know that cows make a lot more milk than sheep, right? And I said, yes, I understand that. So if I was a raw milk producer, I'd probably be milking cows instead of goats because I'd get more milk that way. But that's the way the bill's written. We don't have dairy farms in Iowa that go that small, not pasteurized grade A dairies. And so a lot of people who are expressing interest in this and who are actually able to move forward on this, many of them don't have a lot of the equipment already. So to produce sanitary milk requires a lot of stainless steel, requires a lot of, acid and cleaning chemicals. Obviously, that's not going into your milk. I want to clarify, there's no acid being in your milk. It's rinsed afterwards, but it's just like the food that you eat at a restaurant, right? We want to make sure that it's food, all of our stainless steel and all of the piping that's taking milk from that cow into the bulk tank is basically food grade because it is a food product. And that can be a very expensive investment. And it's something that if you are a grade A dairy that's been, milking 60 or 100 cows, you have all of that equipment in place. But if you're a person who has a couple cows in their backyard and they want to start selling milk to their neighbor, you might not have all of that equipment already in place, and there's an extra investment when it comes to that. So that's created a little bit of some issues for us as well while we've been troubleshooting with producers that are looking to get into raw milk production.
Thank you for that explanation. So could you share any benefits of consuming raw milk?
I can share benefits of consuming milk. Dairy it's a great and wholesome product. It has your 13 essential nutrients. It's high in calcium. It's got great high quality protein. The fat in dairy is it's good fat. I don't drink 2% milk or skim milk. I only drink whole milk because I really believe that dairy fat is good for you and it's delicious. So there's a lot of benefits to consuming dairy products. And pasteurized milk is safe for consumption. I don't personally believe that there's any additional benefits to consuming raw milk.
That's really funny you say that because Dr. Stephanie Clark, our previous guest we had on the podcast, had a very similar answer. Our next question, though, is can you share any drawbacks of consuming raw milk with us here today?
Yeah, so they're always going to have some risk when you're consuming raw milk, right? It would just be like if you were eating a rare steak or an uncooked steak. And I personally prefer my steaks rare for the taste There's no difference in health if I'm eating a well-done steak versus a rare steak. When you're not meeting some of those basic levels of food safety, right, you're going to have some risk associated with that. We can mitigate some of that risk on farm by using some of these sanitizing practices, by making sure that we're producing a very clean product. And a lot of grade A dairies are doing this already, right? So we can produce a safer product on farm. There's steps you can take for raw milk consumption, like making sure that it's cooled right away, making sure that you're cleaning your equipment properly, making sure that your cows are kept clean and housed somewhere where they're not getting bacteria introduced into that teat end. There's ways that you can mitigate that risk with raw milk consumption, but there will always be some risk. And so pasteurized milk is going to, the step of pasteurization is going to completely eliminate that risk. And so a lot of it comes back to this idea of consumer freedom, right? And I think when the bill was passed, a lot of it was based on consumer freedom, right? And if somebody prefers to be able to get their raw milk from somebody who's not pasteurizing, the bill was based on the idea that that person should be allowed to go consume that product. But I think it's important for consumers to recognize that there's always going to be some risk associated with that. It's just a question of how much risk you're willing to accept.
Perfect. So you kind of talked about pasteurization a little bit, but could you explain a little more about what that really is?
So pasteurization, and I'm sure Dr. Clark talked about this quite a bit, and she'll know all the stuff off the top of her head. So her answer is probably going to be the one you want to go with over mine. But in general terms, pasteurization is going to be heating that milk up to kill off any bacteria that are in there. So it's basically cooking milk, for lack of a better term. And I had a couple backyard cows when I was growing up. That's actually how I got involved in the dairy industry in the first place. I had an old Ayrshire cow named Hillary that I took to the county fair, and that's how I got kind of plugged into the dairy industry when I was younger and loved it so much. I started working on commercial dairy farms and studying it and got a PhD in it. And here I am. When we had our backyard cow or cows when I was growing up, my mom actually pasteurized the milk in our kitchen. So she had a home pasteurizer that brought the milk up to temperature and made sure that it killed off any bacteria that are in the milk. I think a lot of where people get confused is there's a difference between pasteurization and homogenization. So pasteurization is basically cooking the milk to kill off any bacteria that are in there. Homogenization is going to be breaking down those fat globules so that they don't rise to the top. So you've probably heard the phrase that the cream rises to the top, right? And so if you have milk that has not been homogenized, that cream is going to separate. And some people actually like that. There are grade A dairies that produce what we call cream-line milk. I actually kind of like cream-line milk too. That's what I grew up with. The fat comes up to the top and you shake it before you drink it, and it's got like a very rich flavor. It's kind of unique. And like I said, there's actually dairies that produce this cream-line milk. And some people think that they can, I don't know if this is accurate or not, but some people claim that they can digest the cream-line milk better than they can digest regular milk. You said you grew up with dairy goats, Haley, and dairy goats are naturally homogenized, actually. So if you put goat milk in the fridge and cow milk in the fridge, the cream will rise to the top of the cow milk, but not the goat milk. And that's just because the fat globules are a different size, right? So they don't stay in solution in cow's milk versus goat's milk. That's what homogenization is. And so pasteurization and homogenization are two different things. You can pasteurize milk without homogenizing it. You can also, if you wanted to, you could homogenize milk without pasteurizing it. I'm not sure who's doing that. Usually people who want it unpasteurized also want unhomogenized too. But they are two different processes. And if you want milk that's not homogenized, there's markets for that already.
Our next question may be a little bit redundant after the last one, but as a professor and animal scientist, why do you think it's so important to pasteurize milk in our other dairy products?
A lot of it comes back to risk and mitigating that risk. And for me, the people who are at the highest risk when it comes to consuming raw milk products are going to be your elderly, your immune compromised, and your young people. And so if you're an adult, if you're a consenting adult and you decide that you would like to drink raw milk because you prefer the flavor and you prefer being able to go to your neighbor and buy milk from them, there's reasons that you might want to do that as an adult who can understand the risks, and that might be a risk that you want to take on for yourself. Where I get most concerned about it is when we're talking about those at-risk populations.
So after kind of talking about the whole recent legalization of raw milk in Iowa, who do you see has been the main customer base or demographic for pushing for not just the legalization, but purchasing this raw milk?
So that's actually data that we don't have because we don't actually know how many raw milk producers there are. We don't know how much milk they're making. We don't know how many consumers they have because you have to sell it off farm. You can't take it to the grocery store. You can't be selling it off farm. And we don't have a registry of raw milk producers in Iowa. Grade A pasteurized producers that are being inspected by IDOLs do have access to knowing who those people are. We have access to processing plants. We can kind of figure out some of that information when it comes to milk produced through traditional means. We really have no idea how many raw milk producers we have in Iowa, how many people they're serving, who they're serving. We've got no idea on this. So it's kind of the Wild West right now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gail Carpenter, for sitting down and speaking with us today. Do you have any more thoughts or feelings you would like to share with us on this topic?
Yeah, I think that the choice to consume raw milk is going to be your own choice. Like I said, choice to produce raw milk is the producer's choice as well. We're here as Dairy Extension. We're here to serve Iowa's dairy producers. And so we take questions from raw milk producers all the time. And we hope that they reach out to us if they have questions about how to do it safely. We don't want them just trying to figure it out on their own. We want them to come to us. But that doesn't mean that we also don't support grade A dairy producers as well. And really want to make sure that those producers who are following that pasteurized milk ordinance and are pasteurizing their milk and producing a very safe, high quality product, that those people are also supported. So that would be what I say is that, don't feel like if you can't afford to go purchase raw milk, that the stuff you get from the store isn't just as good. It is a very safe, nutritious product and buy from our grade A dairy producers at your local Hy-Vee or wherever you go shopping for groceries. So keep buying milk, keep eating cheese, treat yourself to some ice cream, and know that you're doing yourself a favor.
What a great educational conversation with Dr. Gail Carpenter. Our next speaker joining us is Dr. Francis Tickey, owner of Radiance Dairy. Francis and his wife Susan are located in Fairfield, Iowa, where they own and operate their organic dairy farm.
Thank you so much for being here with us today, Francis. Could you speak to us briefly about your opinion on the recent legalization of raw milk here in the state of Iowa?
Well, I think the new law that Iowa passed is good. It's a good step forward. Several parts of it are pretty good, I think. And one is that it does require some testing to make sure that the milk is of high quality and not contaminated. And so that's a good thing because some people do a better job than others do. And so we should have higher standards. One of the limitations of the law is that it only applies to farms with 10 cows or fewer, which means that we don't qualify to sell raw milk. Now, we have a loyal customer base here in our little town, but a lot of them would like to have raw milk. They are frustrated by the law. If there's an amendment to the law in the future, that it would allow any farm that is otherwise inspected by the state of Iowa, even if for more than 10 cows, we could also sell raw milk. Because now this law allows farms with 10 or fewer cows to sell raw milk, even if they're not inspected by any other agency or have never been inspected before. We are very thoroughly inspected in many regards, and so there's no reason why we couldn't qualify.
Do you see in the next couple of years new laws and regulations being put in place so that these larger dairy operations would be able to sell raw milk?
I think it would be good, but again, they should also have some requirements for testing of the raw milk. Basically, all the dairy farms in Iowa that sell milk to processors are inspected regularly. So they already have that base level of inspection. So my suggestion is that they could be allowed to sell raw milk if they have the higher level of testing of the raw milk as well.
Can you share any benefits of consuming raw milk?
Are there benefits to raw milk? Well, that's a controversial topic, and a lot of the people in the industry will say no, but they haven't researched it. However, there's been some research in Europe, a very big study over several European countries and many scientists. And what they found is that when children drink raw milk, they have less asthma, less hay fever, and fewer allergies. And so that's some preliminary data that shows that there can be some health benefits. And we know that pasteurizing milk does change the structure somewhat. It denatures some of the enzymes in the milk and so on. It's not unreasonable to expect there could be some benefits from drinking the raw milk. But I don't know of anybody in this country that is studying the benefits of raw milk. It's not really fair for them to say, well, there are no benefits if they've not even looked into it.
Can you share any drawbacks of consuming raw milk with us?
Obviously, if it's any product is contaminated, whether it's cantaloupe or lettuce or anything, there can be some health issues. Yes, there could be some drawbacks, but we just need to be vigilant and do a good job. Almost all of the other 50 states allow some raw milk sales. The dairy industry has just been against it just because they like to keep the whole pie themselves.
As an organic dairy farm owner, what are your thoughts on pasteurizing milk?
We are required by law to pasteurize milk. So we pasteurize our milk at the lowest temperature allowed by law. There are really three categories of pasteurizations that are used. And we use vat pasteurization. That means it's done in batches. We heat the milk to 145 degrees for half an hour, and then it qualifies for pasteurization. Well, that's the lowest temperature that's allowed. Most milk is actually pasteurized at what's called high temperature short time, which is 162 degrees for 15 seconds. So that's how most milk is pasteurized. However, there's also something that's becoming more popular. It's called high temperature ultra pasteurization. And there they heat it up to like 185 degrees for a fraction of a second. That sterilizes the milk, actually. With ultra pasteurization, you really can get by without even refrigerating the milk, as long as you can aseptically package it. If you can put it in packages that are antiseptic. Now, some people say, well, by then you've pretty much killed the life quote of the milk. You've changed the chemistry somewhat by a high temperature. It allows some companies to ship milk long distances and keep it on the shelf for a longer time.
Who has been the main customer base pushing for the legalization of raw milk in Iowa, and why?
That's a good question. I think it's generally people who are looking for healthy foods. They're looking for unprocessed foods. They're not the McDonald's kind of person. And it's interesting, in Fairfield, where our dairy is, there is a lot of interest in healthy foods, organic foods. As a matter of fact, many years ago, the state of Iowa had an exception for raw milk. Even though raw milk was illegal, they said if you had a note from your doctor that you needed to have it, then you could have raw milk. And they got like 50 requests from Fairfield, Iowa within a short time, and they panicked and said, oh, we're not going to do that. So in our community, there's a lot of interest in healthy foods, unprocessed food, and pasteurized milk is processed food, basically.
We really appreciate Dr. Francis Tickey taking time out of his busy schedule to sit down and share some of his thoughts with us today.
Our final guest joining us is Esther Arkfeld, owner of The Milkery, a micro dairy located here in Iowa. Esther, could you start by sharing a little bit about you and your dairy operation?
Well, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It's definitely an exciting topic. Yeah, we own a micro dairy here in Iowa. We milk a couple of Jerseys and Brown Swiss cows, and we certified by the Raw Milk Institute as our dairy. And so we also played a big role in getting the raw milk legalized here in the state. So our dairy is based on more of a herd share model. And that's where customers become members, and then they get their milk on a consistent basis through.
It's like a subscription kind of, right?
Yeah, it's very similar to.
That's kind of like the HelloFresh boxes and things like that they're doing now. I hear they're really popular and a growing industry. So that's really cool to see that you're doing that in the dairy space.
I think it's a right way for people to be able to access raw milk. It's also a great way for the farmer and the consumer to connect and build that relationship and to provide a food source in our community.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Esther. Our next question that we have is if you could speak to us briefly about your opinion, just in general, of the recent legalization of raw milk here in the state of Iowa.
Mentioned in the intro, I played a big role in helping the efforts to get raw milk sales legalized in our state. Just a little bit of history on that. We have tried to legalize the sale of raw milk or the accessibility to raw milk for 17 years. And so this year we finally were able to pass a law that would allow consumers to go to a farm and to purchase raw milk from a farmer of their choosing. And then, of course, there's some requirements to the farmer and to the consumer in that legislative bill. It's definitely something that I wholeheartedly support. And I feel that there's even though it's some people might consider it a small niche market, it's definitely a market that we're able to meet the demand.
Very interesting. So, with all of this, the recent legalization of raw milk, how has this recent law affected your business?
Well, it's allowed us to be more open, and I think it's allowing for the conversation to be had in more of an open, honest way. Whereas before, it was a very hushed topic to be discussed because of the illegal status. And so I think it's allowing more of the conversation, allowing people to feel more free to access this food source. For some people, that's the only way they can consume dairy. And I feel like dairy is such an important part to our food source, whether you choose to consume it commercially as a pasteurized product or whether you choose to consume it as a raw milk product. This bill wasn't to pit one market against the other. It was really about, what do the consumers of Iowa want, even though it's say that it's about 3% is what they're estimating that of the community that would choose to consume it. And even though it's a small community, it's still part of our community here in Iowa. And so in order for them to have access to that, I think was a really great step in the direction of consumer freedom. Up to this point, people would either buy it, under the table very quietly, or they would cross state lines to purchase it. And, in my mind, I would be more supportive of supporting our local farmers here instead of seeing all that money and support go out of state. There are so many farmers here in this state who are very well suited to meet that demand.
Can you share any benefits of consuming raw milk?
Sure. Well, of course, if you Google or if you look into raw milk, you're going to get a lot of different opinions. I will tell you a little bit of my personal story of how we chose to go that direction. I grew up on raw milk. I grew up in a different country where raw milk was free to access. And so having grown up with that, that wasn't a taboo food source. So then when I had my first daughter, very quickly got pregnant with my second daughter, which caused me to lose a lot of my breast milk supply. And so in order for me to feed my first daughter, I'd have to find another food source. And so of course most moms reach for formula. And we tried several different options, and that did not work well for her. She threw up 75% of her bottle in between each feedings. And so then you have to look at, what is the option for my daughter who obviously needs a good nutritional food source. And so that's when we explored the option of raw milk. And we found a farmer in the state where we lived at the time where raw milk accessibility was legal. We were able to meet with that farmer to see what their operation looked like. And then we made an educated choice to purchase that milk from her. And we then used that along with some other ingredients to make a suitable infant formula. And from the very first bottle, she stopped throwing up and she began to thrive. So for moms like me, for people like my daughter who cannot consume commercial dairy, it's just a really great option. Some other benefits out there, I've heard dozens and dozens of stories of people who have dairy intolerances or sensitivities who can consume raw dairy, but cannot consume commercial dairy. Many people who have issues like gut issues, skin issues like eczema, respiratory issues like asthma, and other type of respiratory issues, when they switch to raw dairy, for some reason, that seems to alleviate those things. So you'll hear many different stories and personal stories of how raw dairy has been beneficial to them.
Awesome. I would have never thought about it in that aspect of your daughter was unable to consume the formula and needed to find an alternative food source. That's very interesting. But moving on to our next question, can you possibly share any drawbacks of consuming raw dairy products?
Because I'm not pro raw dairy, there's very few things that I would consider to be a drawback. As a raw milk producer, I do think that there are some drawbacks in regards to raw milk as far as how it's produced. But producing the milk for the intention of raw consumption has to be done a bit different than producing milk intended for pasteurization and then consumption after that. And so if a farmer is not diligent in their processes of producing that milk for raw consumption, then you could have some drawbacks. But I would say the majority of producers who produce for the raw consumption. No.
Esther, yourself as a dairy farm owner, what are your thoughts on pasteurizing milk?
I definitely think that pasteurized milk has a place. Obviously, there's a very big market for that. I certainly personally am not one to pit one of the industries against the other because I think that they're both needed in our society. And again, this really goes back to the individual's choice. In my mind, you ought to have the freedom to access the food and the nutritional options that you need to be healthy. And so if for a lot of people that's pasteurized dairy products, and that's wonderful. And for some people that's raw dairy products. And so I feel like there should be a place at the table for both of those.
So our last question that we have for you today, Esther, is who has been the main customer base pushing for the legalization of raw milk here in the state of Iowa and why?
Capital. During the years that we've tried to legalize this, you would have seen the people who came to support this bill to be of all different walks of life. You would see many families, moms, dads, children, older people. It really, spans the whole spectrum. It's not like it's one type of person. For me, many of my customers, they really want to consume dairy and they're looking for an option because many times they cannot consume pasteurized dairy. And so many of my customers come from all different walks of life. You have older, younger children, you have highly educated, and some that our society would consider not as educated. I don't see that that is a determining factor as to who consumes more of that. I just think that it really comes down to, the individual is trying to find the best nutritional option for their health.
Great. Well, thank you for sitting down with us. I know I learned a lot from listening to your stories and your experiences.
This has been a very insightful and educational conversation. I'm so glad we had the opportunity to discuss this topic with so many educated professionals in the dairy industry. Regan, what were your thoughts on this podcast?
I totally agree. I've learned so much from each of our guest speakers and feel like I was able to gain a grasp on a topic I previously knew nothing about. It's interesting to hear firsthand from so many professionals about how these changes are affecting the industry.
I really have developed a deeper appreciation for the dairy industry and really gained a lot of value from having this controversial conversation with everyone. And I really was able to form my own opinion on this topic after this conversation about a issue that I previously also did not have a whole lot of knowledge about, but it has been a topic that has been in the media and the news a lot lately. So I feel like this was very relevant and an important topic to share with our audience in our podcast.
Thank you, Regan and Haley, for that great discussion around raw milk. I really appreciate all that information that you guys were able to bring to light here. I think it's something that's really important, and there were so many good points introduced about who consumes raw milk, the benefits and drawbacks of consuming it, and how producers are affected by the legalizations and the procedures that are in place around it.
Yeah. So prior to hosting this podcast episode, about a year ago, I listened to a podcast that was talking about raw milk trade in California and how it couldn't be consumed for humans, but it could be for animals. And just an interesting topic to have check back up on, especially in the local area and what the raw milk industry looks like.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So special thank you to our hosts again, Regan and Haley. And thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again on To email us with any comments, questions, or concerns, please send us an email at contemporary@iastate.edu.